we're joined here today by one Curtis Yarvin, who needs very little introduction at all. How are you today?
I'm very well.
Great. And you're flying over all the way from San Francisco to speak at our conference at the end of the month. So now,
That's
why
right.
were you interested in this conference? What's
Because I hadn't been in the UK in quite a while, and it seemed like a good conference. It seemed like I've enjoyed AA stuff. I did a video interview with him once, and it's before my kids' school starts, so that makes it fairly convenient. And yeah, so some personal reasons, some impersonal reasons. Of course, it's the mother country in a way. I mean, when a man is tired of London, he's tired of life, and the conference isn't in London, but I'm flying through London. So yeah, that's my. It seems like we'll have a great time.
How much of a fan of London actually are you then? Lots of people kind of detest it on our side of the sphere these days.
Well, I'm a fan of London. See, I'm a fan of London in theory. So as an American, it's like being a fan of America in theory. You can have this abstraction of America, which is really better than the real America itself in many ways. And this has been a long-standing English tradition. And so I feel about London. I mean, I've liked being in London the times I've been there. I've only visited for short periods of time. I'll be there very briefly, but I obviously. When a man is tired of London, he's tired of life. What can I say? I'd like to think that's still true in some sense. Depends where you are in London, I guess.
I'm sure there's still things for us to do. There's a few guys in our sphere that have tried setting up a dissident club night in Soho. There's still some interesting things going on.
Yeah, I believe it.
Okay, so the theme of our conference is Logos versus Praxis. So the idea is we all know roughly in the dissident ride, we want to clear out the existing elites. Needs to be a circulation, and there's different methods of getting there. We're saying one method is through the power of logos, through the word, propagandizing people, and the other is through action, direct and indirect. So that's our broad theme, and I hear you've got some vague ideas of what that means.
Oh, sure. Well, obviously, I'm a logos guy. I don't even have a cult. I don't have a political party. I don't have I don't march in the streets. I think that traditionally or historically, there have been a number of errors in connecting logos to praxis. We might look at Plato in Syracuse is really perhaps the most famous case of this. We all basically Plato had this. If y'all don't know about Plato in Syracuse, Plato had this. He was a theorist, and he had various very abstract, beautiful theories about the future of tyranny and stuff. And he didn't use that word, but others did. And he attempted to become the chief philosopher of a tyrant, an actual tyrant, Dion of Syracuse. It didn't really work out. It would be like, imagine if I was to go to El Salvador to become like the chief philosopher of like General, what is President Bukele, the guy who looks like a General Zod. It's a great idea, but like, I'm sort of, I can see the appeal to someone like Plato. Not that I'm comparing myself to Plato, of course, but the sense of, I think that like praxis has to be left to the practitioners, and if you're not a practitioner, you sort of know it. It's like you can't, the mistake of sort of crossing over theory and practice is sort of, it's like in the old Indo-European, tripartite or quadripartite, depending on how you count social distinction, there was sort of always a distinction between the warrior / king archetype and the wizard / priest archetype. And you got to know which one you are, and so I think that basically I see a lot of like the people who are practitioners know they're practitioners. They can read our theory as we choose.
So
Even to sort of direct Praxis is to be like a practitioner in and of itself, and you really have to separate those things. It just, even like the post that I wrote the other day, where I sort of wrote a post on kind of the sort of legal aspects of establishing what you might call a constitutional presidency, which is an absolute presidency. Even that's kind of, skirting a little too close to like the Praxis arm. And you just need to like, it's just a totally different thing. So I'm really all about logos.
Okay, so some of the people which criticize your work, maybe that's they're coming maybe from the more Praxis side of things. So, for example, you seem to think or discount the legislative and executive branches of government or the power machine in some way, putting the priority on culture, organization, the education, the media.
I mean, you can't, like, whenever you imagine these things being done in any kind of partial way, it's like imagining like the partial fall of the Soviet Union. It's very hard to imagine. And sort of the closer you get to something concrete, it's like they always say, like, politics is the art of the possible, right? And politics is definitely the art of the possible. And a big part of realizing, of course, there's the great Sherlock Holmes line, when you've eliminated the impossible, all that's left is the improbable. And the thing is that I'm a big believer in improbable politics. I'm not a believer at all in impossible politics. And so when there are things that look possible but are in fact impossible, another word for something like that is a trap, and I don't like falling into traps.
Okay, so the traps thing is something which is very topical with you at the moment when we're with the whole Albus versus Hobbits debate. And
sure.
Do you want to get into that at all?
Well, I don't know. You sort of present the present the other side of the debate. I don't know what's the.
Well, so for example, Reagan, he was able to get rid of disparate impact for over a decade.
I mean, so not really. I mean, so if you look for like quantitative indicators that like the Reagan Revolution happened, let's just like, was there a historical event here? Let's ask the question, like, did anything happen? So in terms of like the growth of federal employees, for example, if you look at the Reagan administration, you'll see in this just, smooth line upward, there's like a little blip. And then it keeps going, right? And the Reagan administration is sort of full of these like little blips where these are people who are involved in the political process, or basically, as I would assert, the grifting industry, can go back to Missouri and say, oh, we got this win, we got that win. First of all, eliminating, I'm not even really specifically sure what win you're referring to there, but I can guarantee you that whatever win it was sort of like the, we have this thing in the software industry where all programmers actually hate the fact that software patents are legal. We feel that it should not be possible to patent software. And the Supreme Court, the court system is in the grips of the patent lobby. And the patent lobby is basically like, no, you should be filing tons of software patents all the time. And what keeps happening is that the Supreme Court keeps issuing decisions banning software patents. And then all of the inferior courts up through the federal circuit, which is the prime offender here, keep basically overruling the Supreme Court by just saying, well, this isn't a software patent because it talks about running it on a computer, which is a piece of hardware, right? And so, even to establish a sort of legal principle, I mean, we'll see what comes out of this. Like, how many fewer abortions do you actually get by like reversing Roe versus Wade? I'm guessing it's maybe like 10 or 15% fewer, you know, and so you sort of have all of these things that have sort of been blown up in a kind of folie à deux collaboration of both sides to look like really big stuff.
Mhm.
And they're just like, your perspective is completely wrong. You're just zoomed in on these like microscopic symbolic issues. And if you pull the frame way the fuck out, you basically realize that by sort of dissipating all of your energy on quote making like progress on these issues, you're not sort of building the real power you need to do to real you need to do real shit.
Okay,
And I'm
how
so
do you
I'm
build
in
that?
favor of real shit and not in favor of like bullshit.
Okay, so on that, how do you build real power? You talked
Um,
about lots of elites.
you build real power exclusively through the logos. You build, you know, how did Jesus build real power, right? You know, I mean, it took a couple hundred years, you know, but I mean, yeah, he takes over the Roman Empire. Does he take over the Roman Empire by raising a fucking legion? You know, no, because basically there are many around him who are like basically Jewish terrorists
Mhm.
who are very, very used to that path. As you know, that's was a big thing in that area for quite some time,
Yeah.
right? You know, and he's like, no, I'm going to use the logos, right? You know, and so the sense of basically the regime becoming delegitimized is just not something that happens. What you're doing when you basically think about all of this action, whether it's democratic action or, you know, demonstrations or even, God forbid, actual terrorism, all of this is LARPing the left. You are basically saying that, you know, in your society, this is how you create change. You create change by like, you know, storming in the streets or, you know, doing violence or voting or passing laws or policies or whatever. And sort of all of this sort of comes from your understanding of like how things work. And your understanding of how things work is like, well, if they're working in a very smooth and peaceful way, it involves passing laws or electing politicians. And if it works in a very rough, desperate way, then we need to take to the hills and become guerrillas. And, you know, all of this stuff is sort of on this kind of democratic spectrum, which is thinking entirely within the box. And it is true that sort of in your end game, in a sense, the action has to still come through this system and come from this spectrum, and it should come from the most legitimate end of the spectrum, ideally. And but you know, when that happens, it will have been because of decades, or even in the case of Jesus, centuries of work and that was exclusively in the domain of the logos. And when it happens, it will be like, from the perspective of the logos, it will be like almost like a completely spontaneous event. Like, you know, nobody like makes the ice break up on a river, you know, in the spring. It just happens. It's because the river got warmer, not because somebody went out there and smashed the ice.
I suppose the difference between ourselves and Jesus is that Jesus was not really a reactionary. Say he was.
Well, sure. I mean, Jesus was like, but you know, fundamentally, like, okay, so in the sense of being, you know, there's certainly a sense in which he's basically kind of you know, calling on Judaism, which is a very old thing, to
Mhm.
create his new thing. So there is actually a sense of restoring an old tradition somewhat fixed up into this very kind of frivolous, decadent, godless Roman world where, you know, nobody believes in the fucking Roman religion anymore, right? You
Mhm.
know, and so there's a sense in which this is true, but there's also a sense in which, more generally, like, what Jesus is doing is organizing a circulation of the elites. Literally, you know, as the Christian, whether, I mean, this is Jesus is doing or more Paul's doing, like, you know, who the hell knows, right? To say Jesus did this, whatever, right? What early Christianity does is it creates a parallel society. And it creates a parallel society with its own basically ranks of prestige and pulls in people with, um, you know, obviously it's trying to get wealthy people, it's trying to get people with prestige within its society, but it creates its own hierarchy, its own like bishops, its own ranking system. You know, very early on, the Christian church is very structured, but its structure is not anything that's sort of visible to the Roman world. It's not like competing with the Roman world in any sense. It's not trying to use the mechanisms of the Roman world. It's trying to kind of build its own society. So I would characterize that as entirely as logos. I mean, you know, the like the line where Jesus is like, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, is like one of the most brilliant revolutionary lines of all time, right? I mean, it's completely, it's like basically what Jesus is saying is he's recommending what in the corporate world we call compliance. And the policy of Jesus is essentially 100% compliance, 0% submission. Jesus is like, I'm going to follow all your laws or whatever, but like, I'm not going to like bow to your, you know, I'm not going to bow to your gods. And even if you make me bow to your gods, it'll just be a physical gesture. Like, you know, I will never believe in your gods. Right. And the like, and, you know, many Christians were fed to the lions for this, but in terms of like a policy of like, I'm going to organize something that's going to be, you know, sort of not against the powers that be, but outside the powers that be and sort of orthogonal to them and not attracting kind of any attention is that's sort of just the practical, that's your praxis. That's, you know, the praxis is to use only the logos, right? You know, I'll tell you something which is, you know, I'm afraid to mention this because I feel this is gonna like fail at some point, like, but in my 15 years of doing this, I've never received a single hate mail. Not one. Not one single fucking hate mail, death threat, or any of this. I know someone is going to send me some, you know, and you know, to the extent that I get negative communications, it's always from people to the right of me, and so you know, which makes me worry very little because number one, these people have very little power, and number two, they're mostly good people, and so that's a pretty harmless combination. Um, and the yeah, but like that's sort of the like you're if you think of this as war, not in the sense of it's war, we need to like LARP as warriors, but it's war. The main goal of war is to win without getting shot. I'm just like, the main goal of war is to win without getting shot. So basically, like, keep your compliance incredibly high and like figure out how to reconcile that with a sort of mental state of complete refusal to submit.
Okay, so that's the moral challenge for all these people on how to balance those two things, and maybe some people
Yeah.
will be fed to the lions.
Yeah, and for some people that means being out of the closet. For some people that means being in the closet. Like, you know, obviously once you come out of the closet, you can never go back in. So, you know, when in doubt, right? But yeah, I think it's actually, I mean, you know, the sort of the extent of, I have always believed in, you know, the approach of the logos and I've been practicing the logos for what seems like since Jesus was a little boy, and certainly since 2007, and the extent to which that strategy takes a long time, but still basically works, is sort of continually astonishing me. Maybe it'll peak at some point. I don't know, but that's the I like,
So
and
the
I would say that for people who are really into like Praxis, like there are basically two approaches. One is to basically just join the machine and like go on the full cursus honorum, try to become a Supreme Court clerk or something, and like just stay in the closet, and at a certain point the river will warm up and you'll realize you don't have to be in the closet anymore. And
so
the
it's our job, say, to warm the river up and to build this prestige network, which allows for this to happen.
And that's one way to do Praxis, and that requires you to be a very, very disciplined, and you really have to channel your inner Tracy Flick, if you know that name, and if you can do that, and there are many people who are good at that, and they like being on the Cursus Honorum anyway, and just go on the Cursus Honorum if you can, if you're up for it. That's obviously very random and also very meritocratic, and that's one thing that you can do. And another thing that you can do if you're into Praxis is more like the one thing that was a stunt that I thought was really great was the He Will Not Divide Us campaign, where like 4chan had a war with these artists. That was just fucking brilliant, right? And so the thing is, if you're gonna do Praxis, actually just like make sure it's like art, and make sure it's like really fucking good art. Like that was just brilliant. That whole thing was just brilliant conceptual art. And if you're up for that, basically, that's the kind of Praxis you should do. And then the third kind of Praxis is something our friends over in the effective altruist community, I'm just kidding, they're not really our friends, has pioneered, is the idea of just like get a day job and send and tithe 10% of your wages to the cause. There's a slight problem in that we need a way to actually take that money, but which would require a certain amount of organization, which is really I mean, it's not inconsistent with the Logos. It's just a little it raises your profile to like incoming fire in some ways. But like that's the if you look, for example, at really successful subversive organizations like the Muslim Brotherhood, you can learn a lot from those people. The Communist Party USA, especially in the 30s, very different time, but again, like, once you have sort of, when it's a very small number of people just kind of hanging out and being chill and all knowing each other, you can really get by in a very unstructured way. And you really don't have a lot of use for any kind of structures as you start to, I don't know how many members the CPUSA, the Communist Party USA, had in the 30s at its peak, but it was definitely pretty sure it was like 100,000 at least, and all those people paid party dues. They went to regular party meetings. They had to apply to join the party. Like, you can't just walk in and say you're a communist. My God, it would be like walking into like a Hell's Angels bar and just saying you were a Hell's Angel, right? It's not how it works at all. And so there's a place for sort of something like that. I'm not really sure what it does, but it's you can sort of imagine it out there. But that's so just to give Praxis its due, that's sort of my sense of the most practical things you can do.
Sure. Well, if your specialty is the Logos, then let's stick to that for a moment. You mentioned the early Christians, and yourself. One of their focuses is on converting elites, right? How do you
Yes.
identify who these elites actually are? Because I don't think you can just say anyone who went to Brown, for instance. You know,
no, I mean the like I don't know. I sent her a post saying I was going to be in London, and send me an email if you want to hang out. I don't actually have time to hang out with all the people who answered, but like I got like 50 really excellent responses in general. Um, I think it's possible to get really. It's like imagining you're running like a social club in London.
mm-hmm.
And you're like, what would like a really classical, like 18th century social club, but today, and you're like, let's say it's called bollockses, right? And so what identifies a bollocks man, right? What would really define the character? We see him wearing, did he go to Eton? Does he have this tie? How does he dress? Like, what is a bollocks man, right? And like when you're encountering that question in an abstract sense, it's like a waste of time almost, in a way, because actually when you're doing a thing, whether it's the Bollocks Club or the Communist Party USA, you have this abstract question turns into a concrete question. And the only way to turn it into a concrete question is to have a real thing. And then your real thing has the concrete question of, given the supply of people who show up, who should get in?
Mm-hmm.
And the way that do you give them IQ tests like in Mensa? Do you scrutinize their academic record? Do they have to post physique? I mean, right? There's all these, and so that abstraction starts to, I would say generally that you can't even define how you think about that question until you basically postulate a concrete gateway. And on one side of the gateway are the people who want to get in this particular gate, which you don't know until you try it. And then on the other side of the gateway are the people you have inside the gate. And generally speaking, the way sort of real communities grow in this sense is that they basically grow very organically at first, and they basically start with a certain set of people who are inside the gate. And then you say, okay, given this crowd, which feels like a cool crowd, how did the Hells Angels start? I don't know. It was just like a bunch of guys riding Harleys with their buddies and doing crimes, but the and I don't think they even had meth at that point, right? I don't think meth had been invented. But but it was still like German artillery speed or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
But you start out and you have this cool group, and you're like, okay, how do I, the quality of a social network, I always say, can only decline. So you have this cool group, and you're like, you're not like, how do I make this group better? It's actually as good as it's ever going to get. The question is, how do I expand this group without diluting it with shit that shouldn't be in the group? I mean, people who shouldn't be in the group. And that's when you basically have your sort of question of an admission flow and an admission policy. And it's just really, really hard to sort of determine those questions abstractly, as hard as it is to be like, answer my question of like, what is a bollocks man? I don't know. What is the Bollocks Club? What does the Bollocks Club do? Who is in the Bollocks Club already? Right. And I don't think you say the Bollocks Club.
Well, even so, if you're saying it's so hard, you are, I assume, targeting people with your writings that you think might be members of the elite or be potential members?
Well, yeah, see, targeting is like, no, like targeting is something that like James Bond would do or something. I don't target, like, you know, if you would use any word there, I would say filter. And so there's a sense in which my work is like inaccessible in certain ways and inaccessible to certain mindsets. It's like I sort of, it's like with the Hobbit elf thing, or like my general approach of like, passive compliance but not submission, that drives away a certain group of people who basically can't resist sort of their urge to like, enter a conflict in the sense of struggle and not in the sense of strategy. And I'm like, struggling is what an animal in a trap does. Don't struggle. And so, the goals of filtration are, you want to filter out people who are sort of toxic or dangerous or like harmful to what you're trying to do in any sense. But it's like a very, I almost hesitate to talk about it because it shouldn't be like,
shouldn't be an open secret. Yeah.
it shouldn't, even more than that. No, it's fine, but it shouldn't be like, you shouldn't be thinking it. It should just sort of happen. I'm sorry if this is a little too California Zen for you, but like, this is sort of how like the way in which a group forms and grows naturally, is really important to having kind of a healthy thing. Things that are sort of too self-conscious generally tend to fail because they attract sort of very like self-conscious kinds of people. And it's like I have some friends in something called the Praxis Society, ironically enough, who are basically doing like charter city construction, and I'm not associated with the project. I just know these people. And sort of before it's a charter city overseas, or maybe not even overseas, it's a social group, right? And it's a really good group. But I pointed out to one of their founders, I'm like, you basically have two kinds of people here. You have the people who want to live in a charter city and the people who want to live in a charter city. That is, you have the people who want to be part of this social group that's inspired by this idea. It could be inspired by Mars colonization. It could be inspired by like underwater colonization. It doesn't matter, because actually you're not on Mars, you're not underwater, you're in Soho, New York City, and you're going to parties, and like, this is a good thing. And as long as the parties are parties of you and other people who are at least as cool as you, right? And then you like you say, okay, now we're going to buy a bunch of land in like Romania or something, and we're going to build an oceanside, we're going to raise $2 billion and build a digital nomad community in Romania. Who wants to live in Romania? Well, there are definitely people who want to live in Romania, or in a bubble of people like them, in Romania. On the other hand, it's not necessarily the same people that want to live in Soho. And so that's a very important sort of distinction kind of in all of this stuff, is that when you sort of like, in some ways, for something like the Praxis Society, I think the people who just want to live in Soho and go to cool parties are still useful and good. But sort of anything that's kind of too self-conscious has this sort of risk of becoming kind of LARPy and weird and not real. And that's a further reason to basically kind of keep your work as abstract as possible. It sort of feels good to become more concrete, but like, if that isn't real, it's like wrong and like LARPy. Is
Sure.
that position clear enough? Is that
It's clear enough for me, at least.
all right. Any
Well,
further questions? Do we need to? I think that you covered an important perspective
yeah,
issue fairly well there.
I mean, I have other questions, but I think we'll leave them to the event actually. Because the
All
purpose
right.
of the event is, to actually do these things face to face. As I'm sure you know, or you agree even that when you face to face, things are just significantly different when you're debating, right? You don't have to worry about
Absolutely.
who's listening. So yeah, everyone, if you're interested in this, please do come along at the end of the month to the Witan. You can see Curtis, many of the excellent guests as well, and
All right.
see you at the end of the month.
All right. Thanks so much.